I love you too, Tyler. Be safe out there. Those were the last words Debbie McMillan spoke to her son before he set off for what should have been a routine day hike in Zion National Park. It was March 2021, and Tyler had done this before. Angel's Landing wasn't some remote wilderness expedition. It's one of America's most popular trails, complete with parking lots, shuttle buses, and thousands of visitors every year. How dangerous could it be? 12 hours later, search and rescue teams found Tyler's body 1,200 feet below the trail. He had somehow left the designated path and fallen into the canyon. Another routine hike had become a family's worst nightmare. But here's what makes Tyler's death particularly haunting. He wasn't the first person to die on Angel's Landing. He wasn't even close. According to park records, at least 19 people have died on this single trail. 19 families who said goodbye to someone who never came home from what millions of others complete safely every year. The numbers don't make sense. This isn't Everest or some unmarked backcountry route. Angel's Landing has warning signs, safety chains, and more documentation about its danger than almost any hike in America. Park rangers literally tell you it might kill you before you start. Yet people keep dying, experienced hikers, casual tourists, young athletes, seasoned adventurers. The mountain doesn't discriminate. So what is it about this particular trail that turns ordinary people into statistics? What makes hikers who've read every warning, seen every sign, and heard every cautionary tale still make the decisions that cost them everything? Because Tyler wasn't just unlucky. He was part of a pattern that's been repeating for decades on the same stretch of Utah sandstone. The trail itself reads like a blueprint for disaster. Angel's Landing rises 1,488 feet above the Virgin River, carved from Navajo sandstone that crumbles under pressure and turns slick when wet. The final half mile, the section that's killed 11 people since 2000 alone, follows a razor-thin ridge barely wide enough for two people to pass. On both sides, the ground simply disappears into empty air. This is where the chains begin. Picture standing on a sidewalk-width strip of rock, wind gusting at 30 miles per hour, with nothing but a metal chain bolted into stone between you and a fall that would last 4 seconds. The chains themselves tell the story, installed after too many people had already died, reinforced after more deaths, extended and improved again as the body count climbed. Each modification represents someone who didn't make it home. The statistics are staggering, but they're also deceptive. 19 confirmed deaths since 1987 might not sound like much for a trail that sees over 300,000 visitors annually, but those numbers hide the real story. In 2019 alone, Zion recorded 91 search and rescue calls, with Angel's Landing tied for the most dangerous location in the entire park. 91 times that year, someone needed emergency help just to survive their hike. Most of those rescues never make the news. The helicopter evacuations, the technical rope rescues, the hikers carried out on stretchers, they become footnotes in Park Service reports. But each one represents the same moment of realization, the understanding that this scenic trail has just become a fight for survival. The chain section is only 400 yards long, 4 football fields of walking that separate thousands of hikers from becoming another statistic. Most people complete it without incident, post their summit photos, and drive home with a story about conquering one of America's most dangerous hikes. But 11 families know the other outcome, the one where confidence meets physics and physics always wins. The numbers are staggering, but they don't explain why people keep ignoring every warning sign. Let's follow one hiker's deadly decision and see how quickly everything can change on a trail that gives you no room for error. Jason Hartwell was exactly the kind of hiker who should have survived Angel's Landing. At 43, he had years of experience on challenging trails across the Southwest. He understood mountain weather, knew how to read terrain, and had completed technical hikes that made Angel's Landing look like a walk in the park. When he arrived at Zion in March 2021, he was not some overconfident tourist in flip-flops. He was a seasoned outdoorsman who had earned his confidence through thousands of miles on difficult trails. The morning of March 16th started like any other successful Angel's Landing attempt. clear skies, manageable temperatures, and the kind of crisp mountain air that makes you feel invincible. Hartwell had checked the weather, studied the route, and brought proper gear. He even started early to avoid crowds on the narrow chain section. By every measure, he was doing everything right. The first 4 miles of Angel's Landing are deceptively manageable. The paved West Rim Trail winds through Refrigerator Canyon, up the famous Walters Wiggles switchbacks, and deposits hikers at Scout Lookout, a broad, safe platform where most people turn around. It's here that the National Park Service has posted their most serious warning. This trail is dangerous. People have died. If you proceed, you do so at your own risk. Hartwell read the sign. He probably read it on previous visits. But like thousands of other experienced hikers, he looked at the chain section ahead and made a calculation that seemed perfectly reasonable. He had the skills, the conditions were good, and he had done harder climbs than this narrow ridge. That calculation would kill him. What happened next remains unclear, but the physics are brutally simple. Somewhere on that final 400-yard stretch, possibly near the summit, possibly on the descent, Hartwell lost his footing. Maybe the sandstone crumbled under his boot. Maybe a gust of wind caught him off balance. Maybe he simply took one step too close to the edge while navigating around another hiker. The fall lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds for an experienced mountaineer to understand that all his skills, all his preparation, all his careful planning meant nothing against gravity and stone. Park rangers found his body at the base of the cliff that afternoon. Another experienced hiker had become another statistic, another family notification, another reminder that Angel's Landing doesn't care about your resume. But here's what makes Hartwell's death particularly unsettling. He wasn't reckless. He followed protocols, respected the mountain, and made what seemed like informed decisions based on years of successful hiking. So if experience and caution aren't enough to keep people alive on Angel's Landing, what is it about this trail that keeps claiming even the most prepared hikers? The answer lies in understanding how mountains exploit the gaps in human psychology, and how even the smartest people make deadly decisions when their brains start working against them. Consider TMM, who died on Angel's Landing in 1987. She wasn't alone, wasn't inexperienced, and wasn't caught in bad weather. She was hiking with her husband and 2 companions on what appeared to be a perfect day. But investigators later speculated that she may have been wearing a long dress, inappropriate clothing for a technical climbing route that demanded precise foot placement and unrestricted movement. Picture that moment. Standing on a narrow ridge where every step matters, wearing fabric that could catch the wind or tangle around her legs. It sounds like an obviously poor choice from our perspective, but TMM likely didn't see it that way. She saw a scenic hike, not a technical climb. She prepared for a photo opportunity, not a life-or-death scramble across exposed rock. This is summit fever in its most subtle form, not the dramatic oxygen-starved desperation of high-altitude climbing, but the quiet certainty that this particular danger doesn't apply to you. Psychologists call it optimism bias, the brain's tendency to underestimate personal risk while accurately assessing the same risk for others. TMM had probably read about Angel's Landing deaths, but her brain convinced her that those tragedies happened to other people who made different choices. The modern version of this psychology has been amplified by social media pressure. Today's Angel's Landing hikers aren't just conquering a trail, they're curating content. The summit photo isn't just a personal achievement, it's social currency that validates the risk in real time. When your phone has service at Scout Lookout, the temptation to document your courage becomes part of the decision-making process. But there's something deeper at work here, something that explains why the National Park Service installed a permit system in 2022 to reduce crowding, yet people continue to die. The permits were supposed to address the obvious problem. Too many hikers creating bottlenecks on narrow sections, forcing people to make rushed decisions about when to step around others near cliff edges. The logic seems sound. Fewer people would mean more space, more time to think, safer passage for everyone. And in many ways, it worked. The chain section feels less chaotic now, less like a dangerous traffic jam on a mountain highway. Yet the deaths continue. Since the permit system launched, at least one more hiker has died near Scout Lookout. The permits solved the crowding problem but couldn't address the fundamental issue. Human brains consistently underestimate low probability, high consequence risks. What's your relationship with risk when you're hiking? Do you find yourself pushing further than you originally planned? Or do you stick religiously to your initial safety boundaries? Here's the uncomfortable truth about Angel's Landing psychology. The very factors that make people successful hikers, confidence, determination, the ability to push through discomfort, become liabilities on a trail where one mistake is permanent. The mountain doesn't reward courage or punish cowardice. It simply responds to physics, regardless of your intentions or experience level. But understanding why people make these choices doesn't make the consequences any less brutal. When the call comes in to Zion's search and rescue headquarters, the clock starts ticking in ways most people never consider. The dispatcher's voice crackles over the radio. "We have a hiker down on Angel's Landing. Prepare for technical rescue." Within minutes, teams are mobilizing equipment that reads like a specialized military operation. High-angle rescue gear, medical supplies rated for wilderness trauma, and most critically, the helicopter crew that will attempt what ground teams sometimes cannot, extracting someone from a place where one wrong step means joining the victim. The helicopter evacuation from Angel's Landing summit is a feat of precision flying that pushes both machine and pilot to their limits. The aircraft must hover in unpredictable canyon winds, maintaining position over a landing zone barely wider than the helicopter itself, while a rescuer rappels down to package the patient for a short-haul evacuation. Picture the pilot fighting gusting crosswinds that can slam a multi-ton aircraft sideways without warning, while below, a human life hangs in the balance. In November 2019, those winds made the difference between rescue and recovery. A 19-year-old hiker had reached the summit during what seemed like manageable conditions, but weather in the canyons changes faster than forecasts can predict. Gusts exceeding 40 miles per hour turned the narrow ridge into a wind tunnel, and somewhere near the peak, the teenager lost his footing and fell. The rescue team faced an impossible equation. Winds too strong for safe helicopter operations, terrain too technical for rapid ground evacuation, and a patient whose injuries demanded immediate medical intervention. They tried everything: ground teams rappelling into the canyon, attempts to stabilize the aircraft for short-haul operations, even considering whether a ground carryout might be possible despite the technical terrain. But Angel's Landing had already made its decision. By the time rescuers could safely reach him, the 19-year-old had become another statistic, another family destroyed by a mountain that doesn't negotiate with human urgency. The May 2024 death near Scout Lookout revealed another cruel limitation of mountain rescue. Sometimes the victim is so close to safety that it makes the tragedy even more heartbreaking. Scout Lookout sits just 400 yards from the chain section, connected to the main trail by well-maintained switchbacks that emergency teams can navigate with standard equipment. It should have been a routine evacuation, but should have been doesn't exist in wilderness medicine. The hiker had suffered injuries that required immediate intervention, and even with rapid response times, even with textbook rescue procedures, even with teams trained specifically for Zion's unique challenges, the mountain's timeline proved faster than human capability. Have you ever been in a situation where you realized emergency help might not be able to reach you in time? What went through your mind in that moment? These rescue operations cost more than money. They exact a psychological toll on the men and women who risk their lives trying to save others from their own decisions. Zion's search and rescue coordinator once described the weight of knowing that every call might end with a body recovery instead of a successful evacuation. The teams train constantly, maintain equipment obsessively, and respond without hesitation, but they cannot overcome the fundamental reality of rescue in technical terrain. Some places are simply beyond human reach when seconds matter most. Even with world-class rescue teams, helicopter capabilities that border on miraculous, and medical protocols refined through decades of wilderness emergencies, some situations remain beyond saving. The mountain doesn't care about your experience, your preparation, or the skill of the people trying to help you. The National Park Service learned these lessons the hard way. After 6 deaths between 2004 and 2011, they launched the most comprehensive safety overhaul in Angel's Landing's history. Additional chains were bolted into the sandstone every few feet. Steps were carved deeper into the rock face. Warning signs became impossible to miss, stark black text on yellow backgrounds that read like legal disclaimers written in blood. The changes were dramatic. Where hikers once relied on worn handholds and questionable footing, they now had continuous chain support and engineered steps that could handle thousands of boots per day. The trail that had killed TMM in 1987 was transformed into something that felt almost manageable, almost safe. For 5 years it worked. From 2016 to 2021, Angel's Landing went without a single fatality. The Salt Lake Tribune called it a safety success story. Park officials cautiously celebrated what appeared to be proof that engineering could tame one of America's deadliest trails. The improvements had seemingly broken the cycle of death that had haunted the route for decades. Then Tyler McMillan died in March 2021. Then Jason Hartwell fell from the summit that same month. The 5-year streak ended with 2 deaths in weeks, a brutal reminder that safety improvements reduce risk but cannot eliminate it. The 2022 permit system represented the next evolution in Angel's Landing safety, addressing the human factor that engineering couldn't fix. By limiting daily hikers to 300 people, the Park Service eliminated the dangerous bottlenecks that force split-second decisions near cliff edges. No more waiting in line while clinging to chains above 1,000-foot drops. No more rushed navigation around slower hikers on sections barely wide enough for one person. Yet in May 2024, another hiker died near Scout Lookout. The permits had solved crowding, the chains provided security, the carved steps offered reliable footing, but the mountain still claimed another life. If you're someone who pushes your limits in the outdoors, what's your honest assessment of how much safety equipment and regulations can actually protect you versus your own decision-making? The mountain doesn't care about your hiking resume or your Instagram followers. It doesn't distinguish between the overconfident tourist in flip-flops and the seasoned mountaineer with decades of experience. When you step onto that final ridge, you're not entering a negotiation with nature, you're accepting the terms of physics, and physics doesn't compromise. Every death on Angel's Landing follows the same brutal equation. Gravity plus momentum equals consequences that no amount of experience can override. The sandstone doesn't soften for good intentions. The wind doesn't calm for careful planning. The 1,000-foot drop doesn't shrink because you've done this before. But here's what makes these tragedies so haunting. Every single death was preventable. Not through better equipment or more safety measures, but through a different decision at a specific moment. TMM could have chosen different clothing. Tyler McMillan could have stayed on the designated trail. Jason Hartwell could have turned back when conditions felt uncertain. The warnings were always there, not just the signs at Scout Lookout, but the subtle signals that experienced hikers learn to read. The way wind sounds different in exposed terrain, how rock feels under your boots when it's starting to crumble. The internal voice that whispers, maybe not today when everything looks perfect, but something feels wrong. The mountain was screaming danger at every turn, the narrow ridge that barely accommodates 2 people, the chains that exist only because people had already died without them. The helicopter landing pad at the summit that serves no purpose except emergency evacuations. Even the name itself, Angel's Landing, suggests a place where earthbound beings don't naturally belong. Yet people kept interpreting these warnings as suggestions rather than absolute truths. They saw the chains as assistance for a challenging hike, not life support for a deadly scramble. They read the death statistics as rare exceptions, not predictable outcomes of human error meeting unforgiving terrain. This is the psychology that kills people on Angel's Landing, the belief that warnings apply to everyone except you, that your experience, your caution, your good judgment creates an exception to natural law. But the mountain doesn't recognize exceptions. It only recognizes physics. The families left behind understand this now. Debbie McMillan knows that her last words to Tyler weren't a casual goodbye. They were the final conversation with a son who was about to make a decision that would define both their lives forever. The Hartwells learned that decades of successful hiking mean nothing when measured against 4 seconds of falling. What's your relationship with warnings in high-risk situations? Do you see them as challenges to overcome or absolute boundaries to respect? The permit system, the safety improvements, the enhanced rescue capabilities, they all miss the fundamental point. Angel's Landing doesn't need to be made safer. It needs to be respected for what it actually is. A place where the margin for error is zero and the consequences of mistakes are permanent. The mountain offers a simple contract: respect its terms completely or face the consequences that have claimed 19 lives and counting. There's no negotiation, no second chances, no appeals process, just physics, gravity, and the absolute indifference of stone to human ambition. Every warning sign, every safety chain, every rescue helicopter exists because someone before you learned this lesson too late. The question isn't whether Angel's Landing is dangerous, it's whether you're willing to accept that some risks can't be managed, only avoided. The mountain is still there, still beautiful, still deadly. It's waiting for the next person who believes they're different, who thinks their story will end differently than the 19 who came before. And somewhere, another mother will say goodbye to her child before what should be a routine day hike, never knowing that those words, "I love you too, be safe out there," might be the last conversation that defines both their lives forever. Because the question Tyler's death forces us to confront isn't really about Angel's Landing at all. It's about whether we can recognize when "how dangerous could it be" has already given us our answer.